Welcome back, everyone, to Tales by the Fire. This week we have another story installment. We will continue The Champion's Quiet and explore Chapter 4. Please sit back and relax. If you enjoy the tale, please hit the like and the subscribe buttons. Feel free to ring the bell to inform you of new content and express your thoughts by leaving a comment below. As always, your presence is welcome and appreciated. The Champion's Quiet. Chapter 4. Scene 1. Ravel, the brute from the inn, limped through the forest on the path that led out of the village. He was holding his ribs where Thurston had struck him, and his jaw was bruised deep purple. But his head seemed to hurt worse than anything, except his pride, which stung worse than all the wounds put together. As the trees thinned, a dull roar of the river grew louder. There, tucked beneath the shadow of a leaning pine and tied to a crooked dock, was a flat-bottomed cargo boat. It was wide and low, built to carry barrels, tools, food, and fabrics along the river trade routes. A figure stood in the shallows beside the boat, barefoot in the mud, splitting a knot of wood with a short axe.
"Looks like someone got the better of you,"
the man said without turning. Ravel spat. "You got lucky, Boren. He thought he was the innkeeper's champion or something." Boren straightened. He was massive, a half-head taller than his brother and broader in the chest, with a heavy brow and hands that looked like they had been hewn from stone.
"Luck only buys you time,"
Boren said. He tossed the split wood aside and wiped his hands on his trousers.
"I told you to leave that innkeeper alone. She's not interested in you, and you can't make her interested. But I cannot abide a family member taking an unanswered beating. I'll go collect what's owed to our honor."
Ravel found a log to rest on. He was tired from his walk back to the boat, and his injuries needed to rest. Boren tended to the many tasks that were required to prepare the boat for its journey in the morning. The day began to draw to a close, and the two brothers climbed aboard the boat.
"I'll make dinner tonight, and tomorrow I'll settle the insult made to our family."
With that, a small lantern was lit inside the cabin of the boat, and soon it was the only thing that could be seen on the river. Scene 2. Thurston woke to the scent of baked bread and wood smoke. Light streamed through the window of his small room above the inn. It was still early, and the village below stirred softly. He pulled on his boots and stretched his sore arms. The fight at the inn had earned him whispers, nods, bruises, and a tiny amount of respect. Downstairs, the innkeeper had set out bread, sliced fruit, and a small wedge of white cheese. She smiled and pointed at the food. "Thank you," Thurston said. She seemed to have figured out his language a bit. She came to understand the phrase, "thank you," and responded with a nod and a smile. Thurston then held up a piece of fruit. "Fruit," he said. She repeated, "Fruit." Thurston laughed, saying, "Very good." Then she pointed to the same piece and said her word for it. He smiled and tried to repeat the word, receiving a laugh very similar to the one he gave. A small rhythm was beginning to develop. After breakfast, she disappeared in the back. A short while later, she came to his table carrying a wooden bucket and what looked like a sponge. She gestured for him to follow her to the windows. There, she pantomimed washing the windows. She pointed to all the windows in the inn and then pointed to Thurston, smiling. Thurston nodded, understanding. He also understood that he had no free ride here. This woman was kind, but she also seemed to run a tight business. Thurston took the bucket and the sponge and got to work cleaning the windows. Scene 3. A storm built on the river. The air thickened. Boren ate breakfast and tended to some chores around the boat. It was his intent to go to town, take care of business with this man who bested his brother, and then set off to the next town to deliver the supplies on his boat. Boren set off for the village. He walked up through the trees with deliberate strides. He carried no weapon. He didn't need one. He entered the inn and stood in the doorway. The moment his shadow crossed the threshold, the room quieted. The innkeeper saw him first, and her smile faded. Thurston heard the room go quiet and turned from his window washing task. What he saw astonished him. There stood a man even larger than the brawler he dealt with the previous day. He was speaking to one of the patrons at a table near the door. Thurston did not know what was being said, but soon a finger was pointed at him. The giant man turned and looked directly at Thurston. Thurston noticed a resemblance to the fella from yesterday and thought, "This cannot be good." Boren took a moment to size up Thurston, and then simply gestured for Thurston to follow him outside. Thurston grabbed his staff and reluctantly followed the abnormally large man. Boren made a simple statement that Thurston could not understand. "I don't want any trouble," Thurston said. Thurston did not like the growing number of conflicts he seemed to be getting involved in. Each one just seemed to get worse than the previous. Understanding what was about to unfold, Thurston planted his feet and held his staff battle-ready. Boren just smiled and walked forward, cracking his knuckles. Thurston yelled, "Stay back! I'm warning you." His statement seemed to be a mix of proclaimed caution and unwarranted confidence. Scene 4. Thurston's staff transformed into the longer two-headed spear he had now grown accustomed to. Boren was on the attack. He was crazy fast for his size. Boren faked a left hook that caught Thurston's full attention. Boren then came in with a right cross that collided with Thurston's head and then snapped it around. The thug yesterday had a 10-pound sandbag hit. This guy's hit was a truck. Thurston staggered and held up his spear in defense. Boren grabbed the spear, smiled, and yanked it free from Thurston's hands. Then he turned and threw the spear. The spear flew through the air and embedded itself into a nearby tree, looking as though it might split the tree in half lengthwise. Then the real beating began. A punch to Thurston's side took his air and may have cracked a rib. A strike across the other side of Thurston's face sent him sprawling. Thurston slowly and awkwardly staggered back to his feet. The brute actually waited for him to get back upright. Thurston brought his fists up and tucked his arms close to his body. This was a defense move his father had taught him many years ago. Boren stepped in, and the punches began. Thurston caught the body blows with his arms, but it felt like his arms were going to break, and the energy from the impact still transferred through. Boren ratcheted his left fist back in a low position and then released it into Thurston's stomach. That was it. The air was gone and his hands faltered. Boren hit him square in the face, very likely shattering Thurston's nose. A few more body shots, and then the man hit him in the side of the head with a thunderous crack. Thurston went down, and his world went black. Boren stepped back and analyzed his handiwork. Once he was satisfied with Thurston's condition, he turned to the innkeeper who was watching in silent horror. "This score is settled," he said. "Also, my brother will not be bothering you any more. You have my word." Boren then turned and walked back toward his boat. He had a busy day, and this distraction was time he needed to make up for. Scene 5. The innkeeper organized a few of the townspeople to help her with the brutally defeated stranger. They gathered a large piece of burlap-looking material and fashioned it into a stretcher. She guided the group to carry the man into the inn and up to his room. They laid him as gently as possible on his bed. A man named Cobble attempted to retrieve Thurston's spear. He needed 2 other men to help him pull the spear out of the tree. Cobble was a slender, tall, and oddly fit man, perhaps in his mid-40s, but he still needed help removing the spear from the tree. Once the spear was free, he took it upstairs. There he saw Wenna tending to the stranger's wounds. "Here's the unfortunate lad's weapon," Cobble said. "Just lean it over there," Wenna replied. "Do you need help, Wenna?" "Actually, if you could keep an eye on things downstairs while I tend to his wounds, I would be grateful." "Consider it done," Cobble said. Wenna dressed the stranger's wounds, all the while thinking, this man is too noble for his own good. Time drifted like leaves on water. Thurston drifted with it. He woke days later in his small upstairs room, aching from head to toe. His chest was bandaged, his lip was split, one eye barely opened. There was no way to even describe his nose. Thurston was pretty sure he had died, but then he noticed that he was in a bed and had been cared for. The innkeeper was sitting beside the bed, dabbing a cloth on his forehead. She hummed softly, something that sounded like a lullaby. Thurston took one hand and touched his chest. It took great effort, but he repeatedly touched his chest and said, "Thurston, Thurston, my name is Thurston." His crackling and gurgling speech was not the best introduction he had ever made. The innkeeper must have understood, though. She made a similar gesture on her chest and simply said, "Wenna." "You are Wenna," Thurston stated as fact. Wenna smiled. Over the next many days, she brought him soup, helped him sit up, and tended to him the best she could in the time she had when she wasn't running her inn. They spent time exchanging names of items in their respective languages, each learning a small part of the language of the other. Learning words, however, was not really going to break down the daunting communication barrier. A man named Cobble would look in after him on occasion. He seemed like a caring individual who had somehow appointed himself Wenna's guardian angel. He exchanged words with Cobble as well, but communication was extremely difficult. After a few weeks had gone by, Thurston felt like caring for himself. He grabbed his spear, intending to use it as a walking stick. He was halfway through an attempt to stand with it when he felt it get very warm. Then, some of the symbols on the shaft started to glow. This gave him a brief pause, but then he continued his effort to stand. At about 3/4 of an upright position, Wenna entered the room. "What are you doing?" she yelled. I'm trying to stand," he retorted. "Wait, what did you say?" I asked, what are you doing?" Then the realization hit her also. In unison, they both pointed and said, "I can understand you." They both laughed, and Thurston fell back into a sitting position on the bed. Scene 6. The next week was filled with more healing. Thurston began recovering at a greater rate. With the help of his staff, he was able to get around. He even managed the stairs of the inn. He was overjoyed to be able to communicate with everyone. It seemed that when people of the village spoke, he heard their words in English, and when he spoke to them, they heard his words in their native tongue. Thurston was sure that it was some part of the magic of the staff. He found himself having many conversations with Cobble. He discovered that the man considered Thurston a youngster. Thurston did not have the heart to reveal that he was very likely about 15 years older than Cobble. Cobble had been in what was referred to as the Wars Around the Throne. Apparently, the last ruler of this realm had conquered essentially the entire planet. This was not accomplished quickly. The battles to conquer and then to keep control over what had been conquered required a lot of violence, and that period became known as the Wars Around the Throne. Cobble himself was a decent-ranking warrior, who was better skilled than many. He, however, had no real taste for killing and war, and he was eager to retire from that life. 10 years ago, he left the service of the army and has quietly lived in this village ever since. One particular conversation between Cobble and Thurston would haunt Thurston for a long time. "Son, you know your weapon has two very sharp and pointy ends, right?" Cobble asked one day. "Yes, I'm very aware of that," Thurston replied. "Well, you can't incapacitate your enemy by swinging that thing around like a club all the time. Maybe once in a while it's a decent enough move, but you just seem to use a very elegant weapon as a blunt stick all the time." "Yes," Thurston said slowly. "If I use the tips, I fear I might kill someone. I killed one thing, and I can't get the image out of my mind. It haunts my dreams." "A person of good caliber is a person who is appalled by the idea of killing another," Cobble said. "That being said, sometimes killing is the most moral option left. If it's a choice between your life, Wenna's life, or that of some murderer or tyrant, well, you need to ask yourself what you're willing to carry, and who you're willing to carry it for." Thurston stared at the staff beside him. The runes shimmered faintly, like the words were being listened to. Cobble stood, brushing the dust from his knees. "Be ready," he said. "This realm doesn't stay quiet for long." Cobble gave a knowing look. "Just don't wait too long to decide what kind of man you're going to be with that thing," he said, nodding towards the staff. "But that's enough wisdom for one night. Get some rest. You look like something that lost a bet with a horse cart." Thurston chuckled softly, rubbing his ribs. "I feel like it, too." Scene 7. That night the inn was quiet. Most of the guests had gone to sleep. Wenna had retired upstairs, and Thurston sat alone in the common room, staring at the embers in the hearth. The common room was empty, dimly lit by the last coals and flames in the hearth. The smell of wood smoke and baking yeast still lingered in the air. Chairs were tucked in, the floor was swept, and Wenna's kitchen door was closed tight for the night. Thurston moved to the fire and crouched, poking at the coals with an old iron rod. He liked this part of the day. The quiet, the stillness, the sense that the world had paused for a breath. He sat on a stool, leaning forward on his arms, and looked over at the staff leaning against a post. It hadn't pulsed or glowed or hummed in a while now, just sat there, heavy and quiet. "Maybe that's what I need too," he muttered. "Time to meditate." He closed his eyes and took some breaths. A little peace and time to think. What will I do now? The universe seemed to be offering an answer to his question in that moment as he heard a soft knock, a rhythmic tapping, 3 quick taps, a pause, and then 3 more. It was the door. He sat up, alert and prepared for something, but wasn't sure what. A long pause. Then, again, a soft knocking pattern. 3 quick taps, a pause, and then 3 more. Thurston gathered his wits enough to understand that someone was knocking at the inn's front door. He rose from his stool and walked to the door. He paused, worked the lever, and then cracked the door open a bit. A tall figure stood on the front porch of the inn. "Can I help you?" Thurston asked. "I believe you can," came a response. Thurston reframed his question. "How can I help you?" "My name is Hovner, and I'm looking for the magic that has been calling me. It has called me to this very location, and I believe it has called me to you. May I come in?"